This is PatZi with a Z, and I have a wonderful story today. This is fantastic. I have Bill Morris here, and we are going to be talking about Detroit. Oh, this is so much fun. And I'm going to be talking about the Lions. Now, Bill, it's so great to have you here, and I love this book. It's not just about the Lions, it's about Detroit. And it's so much about the fans who have stuck with the Lions all these years. I lived in Europe for many years, and
Uh-huh.
this is before internet. Didn't get news. The only newspaper, English newspaper we'd read was the International Herald Tribune, and they didn't care anything about the Lions. But whenever I'd see an American with an American newspaper or magazine, I'd run up to them and I'd say, "What's happening with the Tigers? What's happening with the Lions?" The fans for the Lions are so loyal year after year. And this is a very famous Yooperman, Donnie Stefanski. And I know his daughter is still carrying on the tradition. They have a restaurant up in the UP. And I thought, this is just for all of us fans who never gave up hope. And now we are happy.
I met her, Jackie
Yeah.
Stefanski. I met her at the season kickoff game against the Rams at Ford Field. She still sits in the same seat where her dad and she had sat for years and years. He went to 200 consecutive Lions games in Detroit, drove down from the U every Sunday morning and became a legendary fan. And his daughter is still carrying on the tradition.
That's what makes Lions fans special. So this book comes out, I think, at the right time. A few years ago, it might not have had the same title, but
It's funny that you mentioned that because when I started writing the book back in 2021, a year after Sheila Ford Hamp had taken over the team, one of the reasons I started writing the book was not only did I have a lot of the history in my head and in a recording from my father, but after Sheila took over the team, and I thought, wow, maybe the Lions are going to finally get good here. And then they lost their first 10 games that first year. And then the next year they were 1-5 to start the season. And that's when I started writing the book. And my original title, it's funny that you mentioned this, PatZi. My original working title was Natural Born Losers. And that was
I
going to
wouldn't
be
be talking to you today if you did that.
it was going to be a story about this cultural futility, this organizational futility that had been going on for 60 years. They'd had a few glimmers of almost greatness over the years, but it was just a relentless futility. And like you say, the fans stuck with them, but it was a dark time. When Sheila took over and it was more of the same, I thought, I got to write this book. But then in the course of writing the book, things changed. They did indeed turn it around and now almost went to the Super Bowl last year. And now it's a completely different ending to the book than the one that I had envisioned when I started writing it.
Well, let's talk about Bobby Lane.
Okay, Bobby Lane was probably the greatest quarterback ever played for the Lions, one of the greatest players in the history of the league. And after they won the championship in 1957, the year that this picture was taken, Tobin wrote they crushed the Cleveland Browns in the championship game at Briggs Stadium in Detroit in December of 57. And the next year, after a couple of games, the coach traded Bobby Lane abruptly to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And Bobby Lane was a legend in Detroit back in the 50s. The Lions won 3 championships and lost another in the course of the 1950s. They were the dominant team in the NFL. A lot of younger people won't know that, and a lot of older people don't even remember it. It was so long ago, but they were a powerhouse in the 1950s. And when Bobby Lane was traded away, he was shocked. The whole city was shocked. Most of the players on the team were furious about it. And there's one old urban legend in Detroit that a lot of old Detroit people know about, and I write about it in the book called The Curse. On his way out the door to go to Pittsburgh, Bobby Lane said, "This team's not going to win for another 50 years." And that became the curse of Bobby Lane, which was widely quoted in
Oh,
Detroit over the years
oh,
when the Lions.
everybody believed it. I mean, everybody knew it. Everybody talked about it.
But Tobin wrote there, the gentleman on the right, who was had a brilliant game in that 1957 game. My father played a lot of cards and did a lot of drinking with, Tobin wrote. And Bobby Lane had the reputation as being the real wild man and the big drinker and party animal. But Tobin wrote was no slouch. You wouldn't know it looking at him right there. They'd look like a couple of happy schoolboys, but they were tough old NFL dudes.
They were, and look at him. He's so good looking.
Yeah.
Wow. Now, of course, the, the interesting thing about this photo is this is the point where Bobby Lane is in a cast, because I heard about this. What happened? His leg was broken. Oh, it's just I can't even think about it. In three places. What happened in that? How did that happen on the field?
That was it was a dirty hit by, I believe it was a guy from the Chicago Bears. And the season before, he had ended up the season injured as well. And 2 years in a row, when you're out at the end of the season, when you're most needed, I think that sort of played into the decision to let him go. I think people are getting tired of his carousing in Detroit. And George Wilson, the coach, he had this two quarterback system with Tobin Rote and him, and that wasn't working. They got off to a bad start in 1958. And Bobby Lane was getting old, and he was taking these hits. And when he was young, it was be okay, but now he was starting to age, and the injuries were starting to pile up. And I think that was a factor in the decision to let him go and go in a different direction. They brought in Earl Morrall as a backup for Tobin Rote, and he had a very up and down career, and then went on to win a Super Bowl with the Miami Dolphins, which a lot of Lions who got discarded wound up going on to great things with other teams. But that's another whole story, PatZi. It's for another time.
And what is this?
Whoa. Oh, yeah. That's a beauty. That was the Thanksgiving Day Massacre in 1962. I was there. I'll never forget it. That's Bart Starr from the Green Bay Packers getting a big Detroit welcome from the fearsome foursome defensive line. That was one of the great days in Detroit Lion history right there. And I remember it. I was 10 years old, and it was like yesterday. I remember it was like the Lions continue to play every year on Thanksgiving Day. It's a ritual in Detroit.
Absolutely. And one of my favorite players, when I did see some Thanksgiving Day games, was always, I just love L. Baker, Bubba Baker.
Bubba Baker. Oh, yeah.
What a guy. And
that picture we just showed of Bart Starr from the Packers being mauled, that's a sack and a half right there. That's when the defensive linemen get through and snag the quarterback before he can throw the ball or hand it off. And that right there is a sack. And look at that. That's a quadruple sack. Yeah. And Bubba Baker was a notorious sacker. He got to a lot of quarterbacks like Hutchinson now. He's developing a reputation at that left defensive end right now.
There's something about Detroit. It's so wonderful.
Well, yeah, you've really hit on something there, PatZi, and it's something a lot of people around the country don't understand about Detroit, and that is the magnetic pull it has on the people who grew up there or spent any period of their lives there. It's an amazing city, and not just the sports, not just the cars, but the architecture, the music, the clubs, the libraries, the museums, the Detroit Institute of Art, the history that is so fascinating about this city. And that's why I dedicated the book I dedicated it to the people of Detroit, because I wanted this to be a book about the people of Detroit. It's not just about their football team. It's about them and their attachment to their football team and their love for their city.
Detroit is great. The book is wonderful. I think you've done a beautiful job.
Thanks for your kind words. I really appreciate this, Pat.
Thank you.